How's it going, everyone? I'm back here today with another album's top 10 list. This time we are doing it for the 1990s, the decade that I was born. Matt Peters is gone. He has graduated. So instead I have Fritz Ortman here.
Hello.
Fritz has made a list. I've made a list of our 10 favorite albums. Was it hard?
Yeah, it was really hard. I mean, this is my favorite decade for music, so...
It's probably my second favorite. Actually, you know what? I'm pretty biased to the recent decades just because I know so much more stuff from those decades. Yeah. So I guess it was easier to make the list for the 90s because I was just picking from a smaller pool of albums.
Yeah.
Still pretty big, but I think I'm pretty happy with what I came up with.
Yeah, so am I.
So let's get into the honorable mentions first. I'll start it off. I have Slanted and Enchanted by Pavement, Repeater by Fugazi, Low End Theory by A Tribe Called Quest, Introducing by DJ Shadow.
Oh shit, I forgot about that.
And the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill by Lauryn Hill.
Very nice. So for my honorable mentions, I had Spiritualized, Ladies and Gentlemen, We Are Floating in Space.
Like that album.
This is I feel like this will be controversial, but Solvaki by Slow Dive. Just made the honorable mentions. Okay. I'm sorry, everyone. Moonpix by Cat Power, Perfect From Now On by Built to Spill, and Emergency and I by The Dismemberment Plan. Yeah.
Some good picks. All right, so we'll go on to number 10 then. My number 10 was one of your honorable mentions. It's Emergency and I by The Dismemberment Plan. Sweet. I will say this is probably, I guess, just to the average listener, the least known album on my list. Mm-hmm. Maybe one or the other. There's probably another one on here, but this is a fantastic album. It's late 90s indie rock. It has that very quintessential sound, but there's like a lot of sounds I pick up in there that I kind of hear from bands that came along later, like LCD Sound System and maybe even like a bit of Arctic Monkeys, but it still has like kind of that 90s American football type emo rock sound.
Yeah, like his voice.
Yeah, and it's pretty angsty, but it does it in like a really interesting way. Like it feels I don't know, it's like the singer, he keeps like messing up and he has like no one to blame but himself, so it's not just angst. It's like, I'm a complete screw up in life, and it's like a great early 20s angst album.
Yeah. And
the just the variation from song to song is really cool. Like no two songs sound the same. Like they have completely different like instrumental palettes from one track to the to another, and I think that's a huge accomplishment for an album to sound very cohesive and also varied throughout the entire track list. So if you haven't heard it, give it a look. If you like pop punk, you might like it. Yeah. If you like indie rock, you'll probably like it a lot.
It has like funk influences too.
Yeah, maybe like a little ska. Math rock. Yeah. There's a lot going on that album. I really like it. That's my number 10. Dismemberment Plan, Emergency and I.
Okay, so for my number 10, this might also be a controversial pick. So I did this like just one album per artist, so I'm not repeating any.
Same.
Okay, great. So, my number 10 is In Utero by Nirvana.
Okay.
So, I mean, for me, this is the superior Nirvana album. It has the best Nirvana singles, Heart-Shaped Box, All Apologies. And this, to me, like, I have a soft spot for this album because it was produced by Steve Albini, who's, like, my favorite record producer. He did the Pixies' first album. He did a lot of other great stuff. He did this band Don Caballero, who I wish made this list, but my favorite album by them came out in the 2000s. But, but I mean, just the vibe on this album is so much like angstier than
Nevermind.
Yeah, Nevermind. What is wrong with me? I can't. But yeah, it's a lot angstier than Nevermind, and I feel like the sounds on this album, although they are less like, obviously like you don't really hear like Scentless Apprentice like on the radio maybe, but I feel like that kind of the sounds in like that song specifically like really influenced like another generation of musicians in a different way than Nevermind did. But yeah, I think it still carries the torch for like great pop songs that Nirvana did, with, of course, Heart-Shaped Box and All Apologies. So, yeah. That's my Nirvana album. I think that's the best one.
It is a really good album. I like it a lot. My number 9 is Dummy by Portishead. This is a really cool album. Great electronic album. Probably the quintessential trip-hop album, which basically means you have like heavy hip-hop beats and record scratches over this really like lush instrumentation. The lead singer, I don't know her name, but she has a very like soft, like sensual voice, and it just creates this like James Bond intro style ambiance from front to back. Like every track could be like a James Bond opening song in like the 90s, and I wish they had done an opening track instead of some of those like 90s James Bond songs. But it's unique. I mean, I don't know a lot of trip hop besides like Massive Attack. I guess you could count Bjork as trip hop in some way, but I highly recommend this album. Check out what's the Sour Times, great song. That's that if you're gonna listen to one, listen to that one, because that is the one that actually sounds like a James Bond song. I wish I had more to say about this album, but it's not like I know every song front to back. It's just I put it on for like an experience, and it's a really cool album. Dummy.
So on the flip side, this is an album that I've probably listened to more than any of the albums on this list, but maybe I've outgrown it in my older age. But I would really be remiss if I didn't say that my number 9 pick is Enema of the State by Blink-182.
Okay.
Blink-182 is the band that like got me into music, and I've been like going back and like listening to a lot of music that I grew up with. Like I almost threw the Aquabats on this list. If you know the Aquabats, they're like a ska band.
Okay.
I'm glad I didn't. But this album, I mean, look, it's a fun album. I'm not gonna lie. It's like a fun poppy album. It always has like all the small things on it, but like,
is that the one with the nurse on the front?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great album front to back. You know, for me at least, this was like a really seminal album, like getting me into a lot of the music that I eventually got into, like more indie rock stuff, and like really evolved my own music tastes. I mean, if you want like a deeper cut on this album, if you haven't already listened to a lot, like Dysentery Gary is probably the best song on the album. There's, I could talk about Blink-182 for hours, and many people know that I have, and maybe they resent me a little bit for it, but I'll just leave it at that. If you want to just listen to some good, fun 90s like college music, like American Pie vibes. One of the songs in this album was written for American Pie.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Mutt, I think is the name of the song. Yeah, they're in the American Pie. Okay. They're like in one particular scene.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, Blink-182, Enema of the State.
All right.
Give it a listen.
I've never listened to it, but I can't say I've really been a fan of pop punk.
That's fine.
It's a genre that kind of turns me off, but I appreciate putting it on there.
No, it's fair. I understand it. It's, I just grew up with it. I can't abandon it at this,
Yeah, I totally understand. My number 8, also Nirvana, but I picked Nevermind. I like In Utero a decent amount. I would say a lot. It's definitely heavier. It's more of an emotional train wreck from front to back. It's heavy. It's raw. But I would say overall, like the sonic palette is just very similar to Nevermind. Like it's not that different, unless you're talking like maybe thematically. But in the end, I just prefer most of the songs on Nevermind. You could pick like the most popular 5 songs on that album, and like almost everyone would know them. And it's for a reason, because it really is just like a cultural touchstone of rock music in general. And, I think without this album, who knows where 90s rock would have been, because it really capitalized on some of the more creative trends of the 80s, like we saw with the Pixies, Dinosaur Jr., something like that. And they brought it to the mainstream almost like with like a hair metal vibe. They go so hard, they play so well together. Song after song is just like a hit. Like that album just slaps so hard. And the reason it's not higher, I know a lot of people would probably call this their favorite album of the 90s, is I do think it might be a bit top heavy. I think it's not as exciting in the back, even though I think it is still really good. But yeah, it's it really is an incredible album. one of the most important albums of all time. I love it. Nevermind, Nirvana.
Okay, so for my number 8 pick, this was hard. I initially had this higher up, but this album is Spiderland by Slynt.
Okay.
You know what? This album wasn't produced by Steve Albini. Their earlier stuff was, but I was listening to this album at work the other day to kind of prepare for this. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is truly one of the most unique albums of the 90s, I think. And like, if you're talking about like, you know, an album like ushering in all this new kind of music, I mean, this is really one to look out for. I think there's a lot of stuff on this album that is maybe like really set the groundwork for like post rock and like stuff like Godspeed You Black Emperor and like explosions in the sky. Mm-hmm. But I think the thing that separates this from like those kind of post-rock albums that are like really epic and kind of uplifting is like this album is just like spooky.
Yeah,
it's not like, you know, it's not an uplifting album. I mean, You got a song that's about like a guy like going to a carnival and speaking to a fortune teller, and he like is very creepy. There's a song about a guy like going to a party and like walking out. And then there's like a song about Nosferatu.
Okay.
Like, you know, I mean, this is just a great album. And I mean, like, it's weird because it's such a creepy, like spooky, like spidery sounding album. But, you know, I'm listening to it at work, like, and I'm like bobbing my head. I'm like,
yeah,
you know, it's really like a groovy album. Like the way just everyone plays together, they really lock in. I mean, some of these guys are like such world-class musicians. What's his name? The guy who was the drummer actually played under a pseudonym, and he played with Kim Deal's band. Why can't I think of the Breeders?
Okay.
He was the drummer on the first couple of Breeders albums, and I mean, this is like that band Don Caballero I mentioned a little bit earlier. Same thing where it's like these guys really influenced like all this post rock and math rock stuff that came after. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, if you're at all into that stuff or even emo music, like, I think that this is really an essential album to check out. Spiderland by Slynt.
It's a really cool album. I've listened to it several times, but I think what I haven't done is really sat down and really listened to it, and that's why it just hasn't completely stuck with me. But yeah, it's one of the few indie rock albums that I can say like gets under your skin. Yeah. Because usually it's a bit more of an upbeat genre, sort of, or it's just sad.
Yeah.
But that it kind of finds like a new ground, and I think it is pretty awesome. But I just need to listen to it more. All right. My number 7, this is the one that I was alluding to, along with Dismemberment Plan, that it might be the one that's least known on my list. And it is There's Nothing Wrong with Love by Built to Spill. And I was struggling on which album I wanted to put on this list by Built to Spill, because they had a fantastic run from 94, which is when this one came out, to 99, which was... Keep It Like a Secret, and then also Perfect From Now On is a fantastic album, and they're all very different. But this first album really like strikes a chord with me. It's really raw and sentimental. It is similar, I guess, to Dismemberment Plan in the way, like it's a little emo, but it's a lot more stripped back, and it almost reminds me of like folk music in a way, at least in terms of like the feeling it evokes. Like it reminds me of like Microphones a lot, something like that. But it's just like really fantastic songs. They're all very simple, and they hit so many emotional high notes throughout the entire album, like on Car or on Twin Falls, Idaho, which is an amazing song. And it just like captures this Midwestern nostalgia for me, which works because I'm from the Midwest. Yeah. And even though this is an album that like I didn't listen to until college, like it reminds me of Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. And it's just, even though they're from Idaho, but it's
Same thing, yeah.
It's an awesome album. I highly recommend it. I highly recommend all their stuff. Like maybe start with Keep It Like a Secret, but that one is my favorite. I'd put it in the same category as if you like emo, Midwestern rock, post-punk, that sort of thing. I keep saying emo. It's not really emo rock, but it's in there.
Definitely influenced a lot of the emo bands from
like for sure.
The 90s and 2010s.
And they also are a huge influence on Modest Mouse. Which
big time.
I absolutely love Modest Mouse. If you like them, definitely check out Built to Spill. There's Nothing Wrong with Love. That is my number 7 pick.
All right, so my number 7 pick. This from here on out, like all of these albums could be number 1 for me, but I did have to put them in an order, and I'm gonna stick with it. So number 7 for me is "Exile in Guyville" by Liz Phair.
This one I don't know.
Yeah. This is an album that I kind of grew up with. Like my dad was super hyper into Liz Phair. As the name might indicate, it's kind of a response to "Exile on Main Street" by the Rolling Stones. So it's to her, it's like a song by song response. But this album, I mean, it's just awesome. It starts off so strong with 6'1", and also she's hilarious too. Just like the way she writes her lyrics, it's so funny, but at the same time so like crushing and sincere, and like obviously very personal for her, and also just like her guitar playing. There's so much stuff on this album where she's just playing stuff that like it's very unique, and it's like as I like try to learn these songs on guitar, like she clearly had like a very unique way of playing guitar and choosing what chords to use. And yeah, she's got an awesome voice. This album also has like, weirdly enough, some like trip hop like influenced songs. Like the song "Flower," that song has like, it's a very weird song. It's like sample based, and compared to, this is like an indie rock album. This is like a folky like indie rock album, and this song has like these crazy like looped vocals and everything. And there's a lot of diversity on this album. For anyone who's trying to get into like canonical like indie rock, great artists. Liz Phair is definitely important to check out. Some people might know her for her like pop hits in the 2000s, like "Why Can't I." Okay. She also is on like the song "Soak Up the Sun" by Sheryl Crow. Yeah, she's like does backup vocals on that song. But yeah, check it out. Liz Phair, "Exile in Guyville."
I'll have to listen to that one. Huh. All right, my number 6, I feel like is definitely higher on your list. "In the Aeroplane Over the Sea" by Neutral Milk Hotel. This is this album has become sort of a meme at the same time as it's become legendary. It's kind of fascinating to watch. First time I heard about it was on Parks and Rec, in that episode where Andy, Chris Pratt's character, gets mad at April because she says her favorite band is Neutral Milk Hotel and not his band or something like that. And I thought the band was like literally just made up. I thought it was like some dumb name they came up with, but no, Neutral Milk Hotel is very much a real band, and fronted by Jeff Mangum, something like that. I used to say Magnum. Yeah, fine. They both sound kind of cool. Yeah. But yeah, they only released 2 albums in the 90s, and then they completely stopped after that. The first one's all right, but "In the Aeroplane Over the Sea" is awesome. Like it is, I keep saying the words pioneer and indie during this podcast, but again, they fit. It is like one of the pioneer albums of indie folk, and it just has so like much going on, and it works so well. Like it acoustic guitar is at the forefront of like most of these songs, and his nasally vocal performance is just like so raw, and it like makes you believe everything that he's saying, and it comes across as like whimsical or quirky at certain times, but also can be very heavy and kind of sad if you really listen to what he's saying. The production is like really blown out in a strange way that almost reminds me of noise rock, but it's really cool. And I think without this, like, I don't think we would have gotten microphones maybe, and definitely not Bon Iver.
Even like car seat headrests.
Yeah, like he said, like a lot of that. It's and I don't know. I think this album is just really awesome. I highly recommend it. I would say outside of Nevermind, it's probably the most accessible album on this list too.
Really? Yeah.
I think so. I think it's an album that a lot of people can get into, and I feel like even though it's, in some circles it's considered one of the greatest albums of all time, I can see just going into the future that this album becomes like more and more legendary. Yeah. And it's deserved. It's really cool. So "In the Aeroplane Over the Sea" by Neutral Milk Hotel is my number 6.
All right, so my number 6 pick is "Either Or" by Elliott Smith.
Okay.
This is actually an album that I got into right at the beginning of college. So this is like kind of the first artist that I was getting into as a college student. And for those long nights in the library studying Spanish, Elliott Smith was my go-to guy. This album is awesome. I mean, truly the first time I heard a lot of these songs was actually like when I saw Good Will Hunting for the first time. A lot of the songs that he wrote for Good Will Hunting ultimately ended up on this album, like Angelus and Say Yes, I think. But this is like an incredible album front to back. Elliott Smith is truly one of the best songwriters of the 90s, and maybe just like of American music in general. I mean, the thing that's so awesome about this album is that everything is very stripped down. He plays all the instruments. It's mostly just acoustic guitar, drums, and bass. Like sometimes not even bass, sometimes just acoustic guitar and drums and vocals. But he is like really an amazing guitarist. This is the same thing where like I'll try to learn some of these songs on guitar and I'll be like, oh, this is just like a nice like chord melody. But like, I mean, it's like he is an incredibly talented guitarist, and he's doing this while he sings. Really some of the most like cutting lyrics I think of any kind of folk like indie folk artist, and yeah, I mean I don't even know what else to say about this. Every song on this album is great, and I feel like with each listen you kind of can pick out a new favorite song for like whatever mood you're in. Although this is like a pretty sad album. There are moments of like happiness. I don't think Elliott Smith, I think he was a sad guy, but like I think that this album is, you can get some happiness and joy out of this album.
How many did he make? Like 5?
Yeah, something like that. And he had a lot of unreleased stuff that got released after he died.
Which was like early 2000s, right?
Yes. And they like kind of like I think he had an album in the works that like I think either his wife or his girlfriend and his mom like kind of had people finish up for him. But yeah, I think this is his best album. There are a couple, maybe 1 or 2 more albums in the 90s. Like his self-titled album is also great. But
XO.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, XO and his self-titled album. But I mean, this is the pinnacle of what he did. So.
All right, now we're in the top 5. These top 5 probably could have been flipped around a lot. Definitely the top 3, but all right. Number 5 for me is the Soft Bulletin by Flaming Lips. This album is awesome. Flaming Lips are very much a mixed bag in their entire career, especially this past century. Well, no, decade. Yeah. Their other like, album that people really like is Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots, which I like, but it seems like a little too quirky at times for me.
Yeah.
But I think the Soft Bulletin finds the perfect balance of their pop sound and like their experimental tendencies. So I think the story behind this album is their guitarist quit or something like that, and instead of replacing their guitarist, they're like, we're just gonna make an album without a guitar.
Yeah.
And they created like all of these like lush Disney sounding instrumentals and played over that, and it's awesome. Like it's almost like Disney soundtracks on drugs. Yeah. But also just like fantastic pop songs, like one after the other. And it is like, again, an indie album, but some of the songs on here are just so catchy. Like anyone could really get into this. There's nothing really like it. I mean, you could compare it to like Pet Sounds in a way, and how it's, made with more of like an orchestra in the background rather than your typical instruments. But yeah, it's one of the most unique albums of the 90s. I think it's the best Flaming Lips album. It's really catchy. It's really fun. And some of like the vivid lyrics they create are just really cool as well. So the Soft Bulletin, Flaming Lips, that is my number 5.
Yeah. I'll be honest. I have listened to this album, Soft Bulletin. I've listened to like the first 4 songs about 200 times. I don't think I've ever made it past because I had to like do something else. But I mean,
that was me for a while.
Album, yeah.
But the back half is great too when you really get into it. So,
okay. So my next pick, I mean, I had to include this on here, but OK Computer by Radiohead. This is not my favorite Radiohead album. I think Kid A probably takes the cake for that, or In Rainbows. I think all 3 of these are tied, but Radiohead for me was actually a band that took me a really long time to get into. If anyone uses rateyourmusic.com, this is like the highest rated album on Rate Your Music. And when I was in high school, I like listened to this a bunch, and I was like, this is bad. Like, I don't like this at all. Radiohead's a bad band. And then my roommate Ford, like when we were freshmen, I was going on some diatribe about how I didn't like Radiohead, like some stupid thing that I said. But he was like, man, Radiohead's like one of my favorite bands. You really gotta just give it a listen. So I like really took some time and like really started to listen to Radiohead and like listen to every album. And like, I mean, Radiohead is, an unparalleled band in terms of their, experimentalness, or that's not a word, but their ability to kind of experiment and still create these awesome, accessible rock songs and just keep pushing the genre forward. This album is maybe a little bit lost on people today, including myself, because it is kind of like this weird, like Y2K anxiety about like, yeah, like it's all about like, computers, and it's not all about computers. This is a stupid analysis, but like it's definitely talks about like kind of the disconnect between like humans and technology. And, I mean, maybe it's applicable today in some ways, in different ways, but, also, I mean, just like the songs on this album are incredible. The sounds that they're able to create are, really awesome. And, I think every song on this album is like top notch. Okay, Computer, Radiohead, check it out.
Amazing album. Yeah. Maybe we'll get to it later on my list. All right, my number 4 is probably the most recent one that I've kind of uncovered, and this is Homogenic by Bjork.
Nice.
Bjork is a fascinating figure. She's an Icelandic solo artist, and she's kind of like the David Bowie of like the next generation in a way, even though I guess it is a bit past her time at this point. But she's such a wild personality. Every album, completely transitions from what she did on the previous album. And I actually might like Vespertine, which is her 2001 album, a bit more, but this album is still really, really good. And Homogenic, 97, powerhouse year for music overall.
Yeah, truly.
And this album really showcases her vocal performance and like her ability to create like beats and instrumentals that are really not unconventional, essentially. And you can see that as all right, so I mentioned Portishead is trip hop. I guess this album is a bit of like trip hop too, and a little bit of electronic in a way. But there's like some wild stuff going on the instrumentals here, and the way she sings over these songs, it almost feels like it doesn't like fit. Like she's like struggling to keep up with the track or going over it, but it always works, and it just sounds really cool. And when she hits some of those like moments, they almost like come out of nowhere, like the way she transitions into her hooks and choruses. It's really fascinating to hear. But when it hits those moments, you're like, holy shit, I'm listening to some really good stuff right now. And that's kind of how it got me when I started listening to this album, like only like 3 weeks ago. But this is probably, I guess, I would recommend to be a starting point for Bjork listeners, I suppose. I think Post is like a little too abrasive at times, but this album, I don't know, there's really nothing like it. Again, wish maybe I could say a bit more about it, but it is newer to my list. But there's something really captivating about it from front to back, and it sounds just way ahead of its time. Yeah. It's really, really cool album. So, Homogenic by Bjork.
So, my number 4, I'm not sure if this is on your list, but I was listening to this the other day. This used to be way further down on my list, but I listened to it again I listened to it all the way through for the first time since high school. It's really undeniable. I just got to put it up there. American Football, self-titled. For me, this was an album that I definitely discovered on the internet when I was like a sad teenager. And I mean, for me at least, this album really changed everything for me and really sent me down like the rabbit hole of like 90s, like Midwest emo music. For those of you who don't know, that was like it was a movement of people who like lived in like in Chicago and other Midwestern states who made this kind of like sad like indie rock music that was like kind of very guitar based and like had a lot of cool like melodic sensibilities and like used alternative tunings and stuff. But this is kind of ground zero for that. Like every song on this album is so awesome and really lends itself to the whole. I think this is like an album that you really have to listen to start to finish, unless you just listen to Neverment, which is the first song. Like you can just listen to that song on repeat for like
which
an hour.
Which is what I did for a long time.
Yeah, well I mean it's such a great song. Like honestly, like that the initial like weird drum flub in the beginning, like as soon as that starts, like I'm like sick, I'm in for something. I think that this is really the like peak achievement of the genre. It's able to like have all these awesome kind of emotional threads, and while still being like one of the tightest performed emo albums of all time, which I think a lot of emo albums are like very loosely performed. They're like a little all over the place, and
this album's not whiny at all too, which
is
like what turns me off of a lot of the emo music. Like
it might be a little yelpy, but it's certainly not whiny. But it's funny. His voice has like changed. Like they're a band that still tours and still puts out music. They like broke up for like a good 15, 16 years or something. But his voice has totally changed now. He has like kids. Like, but yeah. Also, I mean, if you want to get into this genre of music, I would say start here. But yeah, this is a great album. American Football, self-titled, can't go wrong.
It's not on my list. It missed my honorable mentions, but I do like it. It is a very good album. I think the Dismemberment Plan does the same thing for me as that album. Maybe a little bit different, but it kind of like hits those notes. I just prefer that album. So it is really good though. So all right, my number 3. Oh boy, I love this album. Yeah, these top 3 are all so good. And I've been listening to this album a lot this past couple days, but My Bloody Valentine, Loveless.
Woo!
This album is so cool. Where do I start with it? All right, so My Bloody Valentine, they are basically the quintessential shoegaze band. They essentially invented the genre. I mean, they took maybe elements from noise rock of the 80s, like Sonic Youth or something like that. But it's just all these blown out, heavy guitar sounds layered on top of each other. And it's fascinating to listen to front to back. And it is an album that entirely focuses on like sound structure and not sound like songwriting. So I feel like if I were to grab my guitar and like start playing, like singing a My Bloody Valentine song, it would be so boring. Besides the fact that I'm just not a good singer or that great of a guitar player. But besides that, it's like what they create with these sounds is just unlike anything I've ever heard. Even like other shoegaze albums, like Slow Dive, like that's it doesn't like capture the exact same sound as what they do. And I think the best way to describe this album is like it's like being trapped inside a jet turbine with like 1,000 guitars, and then slowly you hear just like really beautiful melodies like warping in and out of the picture. And because while it is very heavy and kind of just like sounds like white noise at times, maybe on your first listen, you can start to pick up like these little intricacies and melodies in there, especially on songs that are more obviously like structured, like When You Sleep or something like that. But when you slowly like just dive into it and take it all in, like it really is like a one-of-a-kind experience. I am a huge fan of this band, even considering I've only listened to their other 2 albums like a couple times each. I mean, they didn't release a follow-up. This album came out in 91. Their follow-up to it came out in 2013, MBV, and you can only listen to it like on vinyl or on YouTube. So I actually got the vinyl the other day. I like found it. So I've been listening to that a bit more, and that's also a fantastic album. But it's a shoegaze album, which is kind of also a meme. I feel like the genre of shoegaze, which is unfortunate because this album is completely fantastic and mind blowing, and it's a trip from front to back. And I highly, highly recommend it. Even if you don't end up liking it, just like listen to this. Like it's so cool.
Yeah, a funny thing about that album is it took like 2 years to record and almost like bankrupt the record label that they were on. there's a
Creation Records.
Yeah. There's that big interview with the guy who produced the album, and he was like, yeah, at first we were doing great, like we were speeding through everything, and then he would go off and do other projects, and then he would come back, and Kevin Shields would just be like, playing with the synth. Like, he wouldn't even be playing music. He'd just be, like, messing around with settings on a synthesizer, like, trying to sample things. Like, he's like, yeah, it's been, like, a month. He's just doing this.
I know.
Yeah.
He had, like, kind of a mental breakdown similar to, like, Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys or something like that. Yeah. And I read, like, it's actually funny, like, after the band went on their, like, 20-year hiatus, like, one of the other members of the band, like, the drummer, was spotted as, like, a cab driver in London or something like that, like, in the mid-2000s.
Jeez.
And then Belinda Butcher, I think she was like just featured on other projects. So it was like, they were just like doing other stuff, and then finally they managed to like scrape together MBV. And I think those recordings might have gone back all the way to the 90s as well.
Oh, really? Did not know that.
Yeah, but they're also rumored to release 2 new EPs this year.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
So I'm very excited for that. But yeah, amazing album, Loveless. Give it a listen.
Okay, so I don't want to spoil it yet, but my number 3 choice is In the Aeroplane Over the Sea by Neutral Milk Hotel. Hank has already touched on this a little bit. But, yeah, for me, this is just, it's an untouchable album. Sometimes I'll listen to this, or I'll think about listening to this, and I'll be like, well, I've listened to this album like 1,000 times. It's going to get old. But every time I listen to it, I find something new to love about it. The lyrics on this album, which Hank touched on a little bit, are just insane. I mean, you were saying, like, yeah, you believe what he's saying, and you do, but he's saying, like, now she's a little boy in Spain playing pianos filled with flames. Like, you're like, yeah, man. Yeah, she is. Like, you're just like, shoot. Like, she is that. But just the instrumentation on this album, like, the use of all these horns and, like, singing saw, it gives it this, like, otherworldly vibe. And I think also just being a band from Louisiana, like, they're influenced by, like, probably, like, New Orleans, like, jazz music and stuff, just with all the, like, tubas, and there's, like, a bagpipe on this album. I don't want to say too much more about it because Hank's already given a great rundown, but, yeah, one of my favorite albums of all time, my number 3 slot, Neutral Milk Hotel, In the Aeroplane Over the Sea. Give it a listen.
Yeah, great album. Definitely listen to it. All right, my number 2 is... such a good album, which it should be because it's my number 2 on this list. It is The Lonesome Crowded West by Modest Mouse.
Very nice.
This is like, for me, it is peak like 90s indie music. Mm-hmm. Arguably like peak like just like pure indie rock. It is like a sprawling epic of just like Midwestern, like middle America, like rock, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, it's really long, but it's like 16 tracks like all Modest Mouse albums, which are always ridiculously long. But right away, they hit you with Teeth Like God's Shoe Shine, which is one of the longer tracks on the album. And that album basically tells you what this entire thing is about from front to back, because it starts kind of it starts kind of hard, and it's like a little angry, and you're not sure what's going on, and then slowly it calms down and then builds into this like explosive like chorus that is just like kind of beautiful in a way. And like Neutral Milk Hotel and Built to Spill, his voice is very raw, and it really like, and I mentioned this on my previous list, how like Arcade Fire, their singing is raw and it makes it feel more real. It doesn't seem like polished or clean. So when they're really like straining themselves to hit these crescendos in the song, like it just like kicks like 10 times harder than it could in like more of a softer, well-produced pop song. Mm-hmm. And just some of the themes they touch on is just like, it's kind of like heartbreaking in a way. Like Trailer Trash is like a really sad song about growing up in a trailer park and how you're just struggling to get by and it's miserable. And it's really just like an ode to like living out in the middle of nowhere and just being like forgotten by the rest of the country. And I could go through like song by song and say like why all these songs are just so good. But we have gone on pretty long so far, so I don't need to do that. But I mean, right away, like the first 5 songs are just like fantastic. Convenient Parking, Heart Cook's Brain, like Jesus Christ Was an Only Child. Like there's so much variety, but it all fits this great theme, and it's it's a masterpiece. It's the best Modest Mouse album, I think, by a long shot, and Yeah. Nothing else to say on that. It's amazing. Give it a listen. The Lonesome Crowded West. So,
all right, my number 2 spot. I'm just gonna say it. Weezer Blue Album.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, my last 2 picks are like not that cool of picks, but you know, I gotta be honest with myself. I mean, this is an incredible album. You all know the hits: Buddy Holly, Say It Ain't So, My Name Is Jonas. But I mean, every song on this album slaps. Only in Dreams, Surf Wax America, hilarious song about taking your surfboard to work.
Yeah.
You can't do that. I mean, you can't surf to work. That's impossible. In my personal favorite, The World Has Turned and Left Me Here. I mean, another album that truly set the stage for all indie rock to come, and I think, you know, definitely changed the game in many ways. Took kind of like the angstiness of Nirvana and maybe filtered it through like a lens of almost like you know, Kiss or like Green Day. Like,
yeah,
it's very funny hearing Rivers Cuomo, who's like in a band that is like, you know, somewhat critically acclaimed, just talking about, it's like, what are your favorite bands? He's like, you know, Green Day, like, yeah. So he's like, yeah, nothing wrong with Green Day. Like, I love Green Day, but
yeah.
It's like, it's just very funny. Like, you know, the pop sensibilities that really make this album, I think, are what set it apart from kind of other, you know, not heavy guitar music, but like guitar oriented, like rock from the 90s. And yeah, I mean, I've listened to this thing more times than I can count. Every song is a masterpiece. Weezer Blue Album, check it out.
This is a good album.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten into Weezer enough, honestly. I've listened to that album through once. I do appreciate it, but yeah. I should give it more listens.
That and Pinkerton, that's all you need to listen to. Don't listen to any other Weezer albums. Weezer's not a good band, but the Blue Album and Pinkerton are both really great. I should have put Pinkerton in my honorable mentions, but I didn't want to spoil this. Okay. So, yeah, Blue Album, incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, on to my number 1. Before I get to this, I feel like maybe even compared to like all the other lists I've done, there's definitely a lot of albums that we left out that people are going to be upset around here. So I want to like apologize to
everyone.
The Pearl Jam fans, the Oasis fans, the Nas fans, Alice in Chains. I like
Wu-Tang fans.
Wu-Tang. I like all that stuff. There's just only so much I could pick. The Counting Crows fans.
Yeah, Counting Crows fans, Third Eye Blind fans, Sublime fans.
those bands all have their merits, and I do like them. But there can only be 10 albums on this list, and there can only be one number 1, and I kind of alluded to it already, but it is OK Computer by Radiohead. This is probably, to me, the most important album to ever exist. Not in like it's most important in my life, but when I look at my taste in music and everything I've listened to and how my taste has evolved over the years, even though this album really didn't come into my life until like junior or senior year of high school, this album I think really just defines my taste in music. And it used to not be my favorite Radiohead album. I guess similar to you, I did listen to this album and I'm like, but I actually like always really liked In Rainbows. And I ended up like, I love a Moonshaped Pool as well, which both of those were on my like previous list. I do think Kid A is a tad bit overrated.
That's my favorite.
But yeah, this album is just so groundbreaking. Like a lot of albums on this list, it is like a cultural touchstone for their particular genre of music. It took the grungy phase of 90s rock, which was slowly burning out at the time, and like flipped it on its head and turned it into this like very like piano driven like alternative rock, and it became basically the album that defined what alternative rock would be going into the 2000s. Your Coldplays, your Muses, like all of those bands like are clearly stemmed from what OK Computer did. And while this album, if you give it a listen and you hadn't listened to it before, it might not sound like the craziest, most groundbreaking thing you've ever heard. And it's just because of its influence and how its sounds have been like redone. But it is just a fantastic collection of tracks. I think it's like 12 tracks front to back. And Airbag, Karma Police, Paranoid Android, possibly my favorite song of all time. Electioneering is like everyone's least favorite song on the album.
It's a great album.
I think that song's an album.
Great song.
I think it's so good. And you mentioned how it's like the Y2K thing and how it's like okay computer, like do this for me. It's almost like it predicted like okay Siri or something like that, or okay Google.
I didn't even think of that. That's freaky.
I find it, I mean, like a lot of people kind of overhype this on how it's like, oh, it predicted the future and stuff like that. I mean, kind of, but it's mostly about just a reflection on the state of technology coming into our lives, and not necessarily saying it's a bad thing, but it's just saying like how things will change. And again, a song I could go through track by track and talk about it lyrically and like how it, like the brilliance of each song, but not gonna do that. But like the first song, Airbag, is like kind of funny. It's how he's going really fast on some German highway, gets in a car crash, and an airbag saves his life, and he's like, technology.
Yeah.
But it also just has so many like emotional highs throughout the album that really just like sound beautiful when you hear them, and no other band does that like Radiohead. And I mean, you hear it on exit music for a film, which was written for that stupid Romeo and Juliet movie.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah, it was written for the credits on that song.
That's wild.
But that song is like, it's one of like the defining songs that created, you know, like slow song that comes to like an amazing crescendo. I think that might have been like one of the first ones to really popularize it. But yeah, this album, it's really just a masterpiece. It did so much for music. I think it's definitely the like if I had to pick the best album of all time, not necessarily my favorite album of all time. I do agree with Rate Your Music. Yeah, I do think this is like the best album, just because it took everything that's been done in music before and condensed it into something that defines like this generation. Yeah. Also, like, if you haven't listened to Radiohead, it is a great starting point as well. It's just a really cool album, and yeah, a masterpiece. 10 out of 10. Okay Computer, that's my number one.
All right. So for me, this is number one. Pavement, Crooked Rain, Crooked Rain. Pavement is arguably, to me, they might not be the best band that existed in the 90s, but I think that they are the best 90s band.
Sure.
They perfectly captured that kind of slacker Gen X vibe. And to me, like, the first time I actually heard Pavement, it was just playing like in the room that I was in, and I was like, oh, is this Weezer? I was like, this sounds a lot better than Weezer, but is this Weezer? And I think Pavement they kind of predate Weezer, but they took a lot of the kind of Nirvana, Sonic Youth, Pixies, as well as like even like Neil Young. Like,
sure.
Also they're heavily influenced by The Fall, which is like an 80s post-punk band. But they took all of that stuff and really like blended it together in this music that is so like fundamentally and like quintessentially 90s. Like, it's got such a, like, not even just lyrically, but musically, it has such a sense of humor to it. You know, one of the funny things about Pavement is that they would say, like, you know, if they have like a good album, like, they want to throw in some bad songs. So like they just were like, yeah, we have to throw in some bad ones just to switch it up a little bit. Although I don't think there's a bad song on this album. You know, I'm trying to think of the track listing, but like, I mean, Gold Sounds, you know, I think I gotta say I agree with Pitchfork that it's the best song of the 90s.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's just the you know, I wasn't alive I was alive for 2 years.
Yeah.
You know, I couldn't really say. Maybe someone who was actually there could say it better than me. But to me, it's my favorite song it's not my favorite song in the 90s, but it is. I feel like it captures all of the music that was going on at that time and really rolls it into one. I think that's one of the great things about Pavement is that they're kind of just a weird, like, I don't want to say they're like an unidentifiable blend of all this different music, but in some ways they really took a lot from all of this different stuff that was huge in the 90s. You know, Stephen Malkmus is honestly one of the greatest guitar players of all time, probably. Yeah. I mean, you might not think that from listening to Pavement, but just the tunings that he uses and just the weird way that, like, try to recreate like a song that sounds like Pavement on guitar that really like captures it, and you're gonna have a hard time. As I was saying before, like where American Football is like a very tightly played album, this is like a very loosely played album.
Yeah,
There's a lot of like mess ups on this album, but I think that's one of the things that makes it so great, and it gives it character. And I think that kind of lends itself to, you know, the slacker vibe of this album. But also, I mean, every song on this album is a great, like, you know, pop song. Like Cut Your Hair, I think, is obviously the biggest song from this album. And I mean, when I heard that for the first time, I had, you know, I hadn't heard it on the radio or anything, or heard it anywhere else. Like, I sought it out myself, but I was like, I mean, this could be a hit. I mean, this is like, you know, Semi-Charmed Life or whatever other 90s like pop hit, you know. I mean, it's an incredible song. It's got like a catchy chorus, and I think like Pavement is a band that you can really like sing along to.
You can kind of.
Yeah. But yeah.
Except for Conduit for Sale from Slynt Enchanted.
Yeah. Yeah, there are some songs that are kind of tough, or like Hit the Plane Down on this album.
Sure.
Like you just got to scream or whatever. But yeah, I mean, if you haven't already listened to Pavement, check them out. They're an incredible band. Probably one of my top 2 favorite bands of all time. But yeah, Pavement, Crooked Rain. Give it a listen.
It was a good pick. I haven't listened to it enough. Slynt Enchanted is my favorite. Just missed my honorable mentions. If I hadn't listened to Bjork 3 weeks ago, it probably would have been in the top 10. But, you know. All right. This ended up being pretty long. This might be the longest one so far. But it's all right. You know what? If you just did the thing where you, like, skip through from, like, each pick, whatever. I don't blame you. I still got the view. You still saw what the picks are. That's what counts.
Still got that Google ad revenue.
Yeah, I wish I had Google ads. But I'll have another podcast coming out in July, maybe this month, something like that. And we will probably try and do 80s, 70s, 60s before we graduate, which is a year away. So we have plenty of time. So
absolutely.
Thank you guys for watching. Check out those albums. Maybe I'll link them in the description or something like that.
You can't give it away. You got to do like an annotation, maybe.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah. You're right. All right, I'll figure out how to do that then. But anyways, until next time. Bye.